You know, when you think about it, the British Empire was, at its height, the biggest the world had ever seen. Just massive. But the real question is, how on earth did this small island pull that off? And of course, what made it all fall apart? To really get it, we've got to rewind the clock way back, before the empire, even before Great Britain was a thing. Let's try to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this thing. Just over 100 years ago, we're talking about one single power controlling 1/4 of all the land on Earth. Think about that. A single empire stretched across the entire globe. So yeah, that brings us right back to the big question. How? How did this happen? Well, the answer starts in a time before Great Britain was even, Great Britain. See, at the beginning, we have to look at two separate kingdoms, England and Scotland. And they weren't always friends. They were often rivals, each one trying to carve out its own piece of the world. England's first attempts at colonization, they were a bit shaky. You've probably heard of the Roanoke colony, right? The one that just vanished? Total mystery. But they stumbled onto a genius and powerful idea. Create massive, state-backed trading companies and give them a monopoly. Think of the East India Company. Yeah, that one. It was a game changer. And this whole empire-building thing wasn't just a single playbook. It was more like a patchwork quilt of different ideas. You had crown colonies run directly by the monarch. Then you had others that were basically giant corporate startups, run by companies with boards and shareholders. It was this really interesting mix of royal power and pure business. So while England is starting to get the hang of it, snagging places like New York from the Dutch and really setting up shop in the Americas, their neighbor to the north, Scotland, was, well, let's just say they were struggling, big time. Their own colonial ambitions just weren't panning out. And then came the final devastating blow for Scotland. It was called the Darien Scheme. It was this incredibly bold plan to set up a colony in Panama. And it was an absolute, unmitigated disaster. It failed so spectacularly that it nearly bankrupted the entire country, wiping out something like 1/5 of Scotland's total wealth. Just gone. This financial catastrophe is really what pushed Scotland to the table. Facing total ruin, they made a deal to unite with England. And that's how we get the Acts of Union in 1707. This created the single kingdom of Great Britain. And suddenly, you have one nation with one very powerful shared colonial goal. And that was going to change everything. Okay, so now that they're united, Great Britain is a real powerhouse. And for the rest of the 18th century, they basically go on a tear, using their combined strength to take on all their big European rivals, one by one. The 1700s were just win after win for Britain. They grab crucial spots like Gibraltar, the East India Company basically takes over in India, and then the 7 Years' War ends, and boom, Britain gets huge chunks of North America, like Quebec. The empire was absolutely on a roll. So what was their secret sauce? It really boiled down to two things. First, the Royal Navy. It was unbeatable, period. They ruled the waves. And because they controlled the seas, they could enforce Part 2, a protected trade system. This basically meant British ships and goods always had an unfair advantage, and it choked out the competition. But, no winning streak lasts forever, and this incredible rise hit a massive speed bump. Ironically, the very thing that made the empire so rich, taxation, is what lit the fuse in America. No taxation without representation, right? Well, that sparked a revolution, and the end result was a huge, humbling defeat, the loss of the 13 colonies. But here's the thing, losing America didn't kill the empire. Not even close. It just made it pivot. They basically said, okay, that didn't work out, let's look east. And that's when their focus shifted dramatically towards Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. This was the beginning of the Second British Empire. And this new direction kicked off what historians call the Imperial Century. We're talking about the 100 years from Napoleon's defeat in 1815 all the way to the start of World War I in 1914. This was when the empire was at its absolute unquestionable peak. And the absolute centerpiece of this new, bigger empire was India, the jewel in the crown. For a long time, it was still run by that mega corporation, the East India Company. But a huge rebellion in 1857 changed everything. After that, the British government stepped in, dissolved the company, and took direct control. That's the start of what we call the British Raj. Meanwhile, what's happening in Africa? A massive land grab by European powers, and Britain is right in the thick of it. They took Egypt to control the Suez Canal, a super important shortcut for trade. They fought brutal wars in the south. They even had this grand, crazy dream of building a railway from Cairo all the way down to Cape Town, connecting their African territories. So you might be wondering, how do you even run an empire this big, this spread out? The answer is technology. They built something called the All Red Line. It was this incredible global network of underwater telegraph cables that connected the whole empire. Suddenly, a message from London could reach Australia almost instantly. It was literally the 19th century version of the internet. But here's where the story gets really interesting. It's a huge paradox. The empire actually reached its absolute biggest size after World War I. But the very thing that made it bigger, the war, is also what planted the seeds for its downfall. The victories contained the defeat. Just think about this number for a second. 2.5 million. That's how many soldiers from the colonies and dominions fought for the empire in World War I. Britain desperately needed them. But that shared experience, that sacrifice, it changed things. It made people back home start asking, hey, if we can fight and die for the empire, don't we deserve to govern ourselves? And you can really see the tide turning in 1921. It's fascinating, because in the exact same year the empire hit its largest ever point on the map, Ireland fought for and won its independence. It was the first big piece to break away, the first real crack in the whole structure. If World War I was the crack, World War II was the final, decisive blow. Yes, Britain was on the winning side, but at an unbelievable cost. The country was basically bankrupt. The money was gone, and you simply can't afford to run a global empire when you're broke. So, what happened next? A period of incredibly fast decolonization. A British Prime Minister called it the wind of change that was blowing through Africa and the rest of the world. One by one, colonies gained their independence. But even though the empire as a political map was disappearing, its influence was far from over. I mean, the empire's legacy is everywhere, and it's complicated. You see it in the Commonwealth, this big family of nations that used to be part of the empire. You hear it every time you speak English, which is now a global language, largely because of the empire. You see it in the incredible diversity of Britain today, and believe it or not, it still technically exists in 14 little overseas territories around the world. So, that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. With all this lasting influence, political, cultural, linguistic, is the story of the British Empire really a closed book? Or are we all, in some way, still living in the next chapter?